At 11:14 p.m. on November 8, 2022, a 30-year-old man sat in a penthouse in the Bahamas and watched his net worth disappear. He had not slept in 40 hours. He was wearing the same T-shirt he had worn for 3 days. On the screen in front of him, every refresh removed another $100 million. By midnight, $8 billion of customer money would be gone. Not lost, not stolen by a hacker, spent by him. His name was Sam Bankman-Fried. The year before, he had been worth $26 billion. He had testified before Congress. He had been on the cover of Fortune magazine. His friends called him the next Warren Buffett. He told the world he was different. He told them he was going to give it all away. He told them, and this is the line he said most often, that the most important thing in finance was customer trust. He was lying. This is the story of how the most trusted name in crypto became the largest financial fraud since Bernie Madoff. And the truth is, the warning signs were there from the beginning. We just weren't looking. To understand what happened in November 2022, we have to start with a question. What kind of person grows up to take $8 billion from a million strangers and feel nothing? Sam Bankman-Fried grew up in a house where dinner was a debate. His father, Joseph Bankman, was a professor of tax law at Stanford. His mother, Barbara Fried, was a professor of legal ethics. Joseph Bankman was a national expert in tax shelters and corporate tax compliance. He had spent his career, in his own words, teaching America's brightest law students how to find every legal loophole that money could buy. Barbara Fried had co-founded a Democratic political action committee called Mind the Gap. Their dinner table conversations were not about politics or sports. They were about utilitarian moral philosophy, about measuring good, about the question of how to do the most good with the most resources. At MIT, where he arrived in 2010 to study physics, Sam found a community of people who thought the way he did. They called themselves effective altruists. The philosophy was simple. Forget what feels good. Forget what looks good. The only thing that matters is the math. If you wanted to save the most lives, you didn't become a doctor. You got the highest paying job you could, made as much money as possible, and gave it all away. They had a phrase for it. It was called earn to give, and it would eventually justify everything Sam Bankman-Fried did. In 2014, Sam took a job at Jane Street Capital. Jane Street is one of the most secretive and most profitable trading firms in the world. They make money in the spaces between markets, capturing tiny price differences, millions of times per second. Sam was good, better than good. Within 3 years, he was running international ETF trading. He was earning over $1 million a year, and every year, he gave most of it away. To his colleagues, he looked like a saint. To anyone who had read his blog, he looked like something else. He looked like a man who had decided very young that other people's feelings were a math error. Then, in 2017, something happened that would change his life. Bitcoin exploded, from $1,000 at the start of the year to nearly $20,000 by December. And in the chaos, Sam saw something almost no one else saw. In South Korea, Bitcoin was selling for 30% more than it was in the United States on the same day, for the same coin. To anyone with the resources to move money across borders, this was free money. The only problem was, almost no one could. In November 2017, Sam quit Jane Street and started a trading firm of his own. He named it Alameda Research, after the California county where they set up shop in a small apartment in Berkeley. He brought along 8 or 9 friends from MIT and from the effective altruism community. Most of them were under 25. Almost none had ever traded professionally. They worked 20 hours a day. They slept on the floor. For weeks in early 2018, Alameda Research was making over $1 million a day, sometimes more. You should remember this image: the unkempt hair, the shorts, the beanbag. Because for the next 4 years, this image would become a brand that said, "I am not like the others. I do not care about money. I am a true believer." He never bought a suit. He never moved out of the office. He never deleted the photographs of himself sleeping at his desk. He understood even then that the image was the product. The image was the only thing that mattered. In July 2021, Sam took a pitch meeting with Sequoia Capital, the most prestigious venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. Sequoia had backed Apple, Google, Airbnb, WhatsApp. Their partners were the gatekeepers to the most expensive capital in the world. Sam joined the meeting from his Bahamas penthouse. What the partners at Sequoia did not know, until later when one of them noticed the rhythmic click of a mouse, was that during their pitch meeting, Sam Bankman-Fried was playing video games. Specifically, he was playing a multiplayer online game called League of Legends. When the call ended, the Sequoia partners conferred. One of them wrote in an internal note that would later become public, quote, "I love this founder." Another said it was the most authentic, most original founder pitch they had ever taken. The fact that he was multitasking, gaming during a meeting with one of the most powerful venture firms on earth, was not a red flag. To them, it was proof. Proof he was a true believer. Proof he was different. Proof his mind was so vast he could pitch them $1 billion deal while crushing teenagers in an online battle arena. Sequoia invested over $200 million in FTX. They wrote a glowing profile of Sam on their website, comparing him to Warren Buffett. After the collapse, they quietly deleted the profile and wrote down the entire investment to zero. The "I love this founder" note has become, in the years since, one of the most circulated quotes in venture capital. A permanent monument to how a smart room can be conned by a man playing a game. But Sequoia was not alone. They were one of hundreds of investors who had given Sam Bankman-Fried their money. Because by 2021, FTX, the exchange Sam had co-founded in 2019 with his high school friend Gary Wang, was the second largest cryptocurrency exchange on Earth. It was based in Hong Kong, then Antigua. Then, in April 2021, the Bahamas. The Bahamas had something the other locations did not. The Bahamas had no income tax, no capital gains tax, and no extradition treaty with the United States for any crime except narcotics and terrorism. By 2021, FTX had become one of the most recognizable brands in finance. Tom Brady was a paid endorser. Gisele Bündchen sat on its sustainability board. Steph Curry, Naomi Osaka, and Larry David all signed deals. The Miami Heat's arena was renamed FTX Arena in a $135 million deal. During the 2022 Super Bowl, Larry David appeared in a commercial telling viewers, "Don't be like Larry. Don't miss out on FTX." It aired before the most watched television audience of the year. The message was unmistakable. FTX was the responsible adult in the crypto room, the grown-up, the exchange you could trust with your retirement. Sam, meanwhile, was on Capitol Hill. He testified before Congress about responsible crypto regulation. He pledged to give away 99% of his wealth. He became the second-largest donor to Democratic campaigns in the 2022 election cycle, behind only George Soros. He gave to Republicans, too, through dark money channels that would only be exposed in his indictment. He was 30 years old. He was worth $26 billion. The most powerful people in finance and government were listening to him. None of them knew. In April 2021, Sam Bankman-Fried bought a $40 million penthouse in a development called Albany. He moved in with 9 of his closest colleagues. They were his executives, his engineers, his romantic partners, his roommates, in several cases all 4 at once. They called themselves the roommates. They were almost all under 30. They were almost all from MIT or Stanford. They were almost all part of the same effective altruist community Sam had joined at 19. And they were in private, although they would never say this publicly, running one of the largest unregulated financial institutions in the world. One of those roommates was a young woman named Caroline Ellison. Caroline was 28. Her father, Glenn Ellison, was the head of MIT's economics department. Her mother, Sarah Fisher Ellison, was also an MIT economist. Caroline had met Sam at Jane Street, fallen in love with him, and followed him to Alameda. By 2022, she was the CEO of Alameda Research. She was also, depending on the week, Sam's girlfriend. In her private life, Caroline kept a blog. It was hosted on Tumblr, and it was called World Optimization. After her arrest, journalists found it. What was in it would later become one of the most discussed and most disturbing footprints of the entire scandal. On her blog, Caroline wrote openly about being polyamorous, about navigating multiple romantic relationships within the effective altruist community. She wrote about her use of prescription stimulants, Adderall and modafinil, to maintain 20-hour workdays. She wrote about her belief in effective accelerationism, the idea that the most ethical thing she could do was earn more money, work harder, and care less about traditional moral rules. She wrote, and this is one of the most quoted lines from her Tumblr, that, quote, "In real life, you are quietly being fucked over by people you'd never notice as the source." To anyone reading the blog after the collapse, the patterns are not subtle. The polyamory, the drugs, the philosophy that the rules were for the people who could not see past them. Caroline Ellison was not a corrupted intern who had stumbled into Sam Bankman-Fried's orbit. She was, by her own writing, a true believer in the same philosophy that would justify the theft of $8 billion. They were perfect partners. They were terrible custodians of other people's money. Caroline ran Alameda. Sam ran FTX. The two companies were, in theory, completely separate. Customers of FTX believed that their deposits were held in segregated accounts. They believed Alameda traded with its own money. They believed there was a wall between the casino and the gambler. There was no wall. On paper, the business was a rocket. In 2019, when FTX launched, the company was valued at less than $50 million. By the end of 2020, that number was $1 billion. By October 2021, $18 billion. By January 2022, FTX was valued at $32 billion. The second largest cryptocurrency exchange in the world. On April 5, 2022, Sam appeared on the cover of Fortune magazine under a single question. The next Warren Buffett? At the time the article went to print, Alameda Research was already $6 billion underwater. Sam had personally taken FTX customer deposits without their knowledge, without their consent, and without authorization, and used them to fill the hole. The cover photo of Fortune showed a young man, smiling, hair uncombed, the future of finance. He was not the future. He was a thief, holding the money, and he knew it. Here is how it worked. Buried inside the FTX trading platform, written into the code by Sam's chief engineer, Nishad Singh, was a single permission. It was granted to one customer and one customer only, to Alameda Research. Every other trader on FTX faced the same rule. If your account went underwater, you were margin called. Your position was liquidated. The system protected itself from anyone who couldn't pay their debts. Alameda had no such limit. Alameda could go billions of dollars negative, using FTX customer deposits as the chips, without triggering a single alarm. The wall between the casino and the gambler had a door in it, and the door only opened one way. Throughout 2021 and into 2022, Alameda Research lost money. A lot of money. Cryptocurrencies are volatile, and Alameda's trades, many of them on illiquid altcoins, on shaky DeFi protocols, on bets that even other crypto traders thought were reckless, went wrong with increasing frequency. By the summer of 2022, depending on which set of books you looked at, and there were two sets of books, Alameda owed FTX customers somewhere between $5 and $10 billion. Money that customers were watching on their screens. Money that customers thought they could withdraw at any moment. Money that did not exist. Stop. Think about that number. $8 billion, the annual budget of NASA's science division. The cost of 100 fighter jets. Quietly missing from 1 million customer accounts, and no one outside that penthouse knew. What did Sam do during this period? He hosted Bill Clinton and Tony Blair at a conference he called Crypto Bahamas. He bought a $135 million arena. He invested $65 million in Anthropic, the AI safety company. He invested in over 500 startups. He spent $30 million on real estate for his roommates. He bought property in the Bahamas for his parents. He gave interviews where he said the most important thing in finance was customer trust. He gave interviews where he said FTX was the safest exchange in crypto. In a podcast in April 2022, he was asked whether FTX traded against its customers. He laughed and said, quote, "We hold customer funds. We don't lend them out. We don't gamble with them." When he said that, he was lying to the host, to the audience, to Congress, to investors, to his employees, to the $70 million Super Bowl audience, and to the million customers who that very moment were holding open balances on a website that was about to vanish. Inside the penthouse, the secret was held by 4 people. Sam, Gary Wang, the engineer, Nishad Singh, the architect of the code exemption, and Caroline Ellison, who was keeping the books. Caroline maintained multiple versions of Alameda's balance sheet, one that showed the company's actual financial position, and one, a clean, fictional, beautiful one, that she could send to lenders when they asked questions. By July 2022, she was sending the fictional version to anyone who asked. By September, she was telling Sam, in writing, that she could not keep doing this, that the truth was going to come out. He did not respond. On the morning of November 2nd, 2022, a small crypto news website called CoinDesk published a story. The headline was technical. The article was read by a few thousand people. One of them was Sam Bankman-Fried's most dangerous enemy in the world. What happened in the next 9 days has never happened before in the history of finance. His name was Changpeng Zhao. He went by CZ. He was the founder and CEO of Binance, the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange. He was also, by November 2022, Sam Bankman-Fried's most bitter rival in the industry. The two men had once been allies. Binance had been one of the earliest investors in FTX, but that relationship had broken down over years of public feuding. Sam had lobbied U.S. regulators against Binance. CZ had not forgotten. In an interview earlier in 2022, an industry observer had described the two men's relationship as, quote, "a Cold War with no neutral countries." On November 6, 2022, CZ posted a tweet. It was 88 characters long, and it would end FTX. He wrote, "As part of Binance's exit from FTX equity last year, Binance received roughly $2.1 billion in cash and FTT. Due to recent revelations, we have decided to liquidate any remaining FTT on our books." FTT was FTX's own token, the casino's chips. And Alameda Research had used billions of dollars worth of FTT as collateral for the loans backing its losing trades. If the price of FTT collapsed, those loans would unwind. Alameda would be forced to admit it could not pay. The $8 billion hole would open in public view, and FTX, the exchange, would have no money to give back to its customers. CZ's tweet was a signal. He was selling, and every other large holder of FTT now had to decide, sell ahead of CZ or be left holding worthless tokens. Within hours, FTT was in free fall. What happened next happened very, very quickly. Customers watching FTT collapse began to wonder if their own money on FTX was safe. They started withdrawing. On a normal day, FTX processed a few $100 million in customer withdrawals. On November 6th alone, customers tried to pull out $6 billion. The exchange could not process them. The money was not there. It was inside Alameda, and Alameda had spent it. In his penthouse in the Bahamas, Sam Bankman-Fried watched the withdrawals come in. He sent a tweet. FTX is fine. Assets are fine. He sent that tweet at 9:14 a.m. on November 7th. By 9:14 a.m. the next day, FTX would owe customers approximately $7 billion more than it possessed. The tweet was, on its face, a lie. Federal prosecutors would later call it the most expensive single tweet in the history of social media. On November 8th, CZ, the man who had just lit the fire, announced he was considering buying FTX, saving it, acquiring the burning building before it could collapse on top of its customers. For about 6 hours, the crypto world held its breath. On November 9th, less than 24 hours after announcing the deal, CZ walked away. Binance had looked at FTX's books and seen what was actually there. There was no version of the deal in which Binance was not buying billions of dollars in liabilities. There was no version of the deal that worked. Sam Bankman-Fried sat in his penthouse and called everyone he knew, every venture capitalist, every billionaire, every politician he had funded. No one would take the call. In the 72 hours between November 6th and November 11th, 2022, Sam Bankman-Fried's personal net worth dropped from $26 billion to zero. FTX's $32 billion valuation went to zero. The investment from Sequoia Capital, over $200 million, was written down to zero. The investment from Singapore's sovereign wealth fund, Temasek, $275 million, was written down to zero, and approximately 1 million ordinary people, school teachers, retirees, programmers, students who had been told by Tom Brady and Larry David and members of Congress that FTX was as safe as a bank, lost the money in their accounts. $8 billion gone. On November 11th, 2022, FTX, Alameda Research, and approximately 130 affiliated entities filed for bankruptcy protection in the state of Delaware. Sam Bankman-Fried resigned as CEO. In his place, the courts appointed a man named John Ray III, the same lawyer who had cleaned up Enron. In his first court filing, and remember, this is a man who had personally led the legal cleanup of Enron, Ray wrote that he had never, in over 40 years of legal practice, seen such a complete failure of corporate controls and trustworthy financial information. FTX, he said, had been run by, quote, a very small group of grossly inexperienced and unsophisticated individuals. What happened next would decide the rest of Sam Bankman-Fried's life. Caroline Ellison flipped. So did Gary Wang. So did Nishad Singh. All three of Sam's closest co-conspirators, his ex-girlfriend, his oldest friend, and his chief engineer, agreed to testify against him in exchange for reduced sentences. On December 12, 2022, Sam Bankman-Fried was arrested by Bahamian police in his penthouse. On December 21st, he was extradited to the United States. He arrived in shackles at JFK Airport, walked between federal marshals to a holding cell, and was charged with 7 federal crimes: wire fraud, securities fraud, commodities fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, In the days between his arrest and his extradition, journalists who had access to Sam in Bahamian custody began to file disturbing reports. He was, they said, not behaving like someone who understood what was happening. He continued giving interviews from jail. He continued tweeting. He told one reporter that he believed he could explain his way out of the charges. He told another that the prosecutors had simply misunderstood the situation. One investigator who interviewed him in those weeks said, off the record, that the eeriest thing about Sam Bankman-Fried was the absence of normal human affect. The man whose company had just stolen $8 billion from a million people did not look guilty. He did not look afraid. He did not look like anything at all. His trial would begin in October 2023. Caroline Ellison would be the first witness. The trial of United States versus Samuel Bankman-Fried began on October 3, 2023, in the Southern District of New York. The lead prosecutor was a 35-year-old named Danielle Sassoon. The judge was Lewis Kaplan, known for taking no theater from defendants. The defense was led by Mark Cohen, one of the most respected white-collar attorneys in the country. On day 5 of the trial, the prosecution called Caroline Ellison. She testified for 3 days. She described in clinical detail how she and Sam and Gary and Nishad had used FTX customer deposits to fund Alameda's losing trades, to pay political donors, to buy real estate, to invest in startups, to fund Sam's personal lifestyle. She testified that Sam had personally directed her to use customer money. She testified that he had instructed her to falsify Alameda's balance sheets. She testified that when the truth was about to come out, Sam had asked her to delete documents. She wept on the witness stand. Sam, 10 feet away, kept his eyes on his lap. On day 23, against the advice of his attorneys, Sam took the stand in his own defense. It did not go well. Danielle Sassoon, the prosecutor, asked him over 100 questions in a single afternoon. The pattern that emerged would become the defining feature of the trial. She asked him about specific customer fund transactions. He said he did not recall. She showed him texts he had sent. He said he did not recall sending them. She produced internal documents that bore his signature. He said he did not recall signing them. She played audio recordings of meetings he had personally attended, in which he had personally given instructions about Alameda's use of FTX customer money. He said he did not recall the meetings. By the end of his testimony, an analysis of the court transcripts showed that Sam Bankman-Fried said, "I don't recall," "I don't know," or "I don't remember" over 140 times. But the moment that broke his defense, the moment that, by multiple accounts from inside the courtroom, made several jurors visibly suppress laughter, was much simpler than that. The prosecutor asked Sam to define FTX's official policy on the use of customer funds. The policy was published on FTX's own website. The policy had been signed off in writing by Sam himself. The policy stated in plain English that customer funds would never be lent, borrowed, or used for any purpose other than the customer's own trades. The prosecutor handed him a copy of the policy. She asked him to read it. She asked him to confirm it was his company's policy. Sam looked at the document. He looked at the prosecutor. And he said, these are his words from the transcript. Quote, "I would have to study it more carefully to give you a definitive answer. It was his own company. He had signed the policy. He was the CEO. And on the stand, asked the most basic question about what his exchange did with customer money, Sam Bankman-Fried needed time to study it." On the morning of November 2, 2023, almost exactly 1 year after the CoinDesk article that had started the collapse, the jury returned its verdict. They had deliberated for less than 5 hours. Guilty on all 7 counts. On March 28, 2024, Judge Lewis Kaplan sentenced Sam Bankman-Fried to 25 years in federal prison. He is serving that sentence at FCI Mendota, a medium-security federal prison in California. He will be eligible for release in 2044. He will be 52 years old when he comes out. The FTX bankruptcy estate has recovered enough money through aggressive clawbacks and asset sales to repay customers in full on a dollar basis. This is the official narrative. But here is the truth that the headlines did not report. Customers who deposited Bitcoin on FTX at $17,000 per coin were repaid in dollars at that 2022 price. Bitcoin is now worth, depending on the day, 5 or 6 times more. In real terms, customers lost the majority of what they put in. The fraud is still being paid every day by the people who trusted Sam Bankman-Fried. Sam's parents, Joseph Bankman and Barbara Fried, both still on the Stanford Law faculty, did not escape the fallout. The FTX bankruptcy estate filed civil lawsuits against them. The complaint, made public in 2023, alleged that Joseph Bankman, a national expert on U.S. tax law and corporate tax structure, had personally advised on FTX's tax planning. He had, according to the filing, helped structure how FTX channeled tax-deductible donations through its philanthropic arm. He had been on calls with the company's senior leadership about regulatory and tax matters. He had taken a $1 million per year salary from FTX, even though he held no formal corporate role. Barbara Fried, meanwhile, had been the founder of Mind the Gap, the political action committee that received millions of dollars in donations linked to FTX-controlled funds. The estate alleged that both parents had personally benefited from misappropriated customer money, including the title to a $16 million property in the Bahamas, gifted to them by their son. The parents who had raised Sam Bankman-Fried inside utilitarian moral philosophy. The parents who had taught him that the rules were technical instruments to be optimized. The parents who had specialized professionally in the legal architecture of tax shelters. Their son had taken that education and built in less than 4 years the largest financial fraud since Bernie Madoff. And they had been, by the FTX estate's account, at his side the entire time. Caroline Ellison was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. Gary Wang and Nishad Singh received reduced sentences for their cooperation. The FTX arena is now called the Kaseya Center. Tom Brady and Gisele Bündchen settled civil lawsuits with FTX customers. Larry David's Super Bowl ad has not aired since November 2022. So, who was Sam Bankman-Fried? Was he a brilliant young man corrupted by ambition? Was he a true believer whose math was right and whose ethics were catastrophically wrong? Or was he, from the very beginning, from the dinner table debates about utilitarian moral philosophy, from the blog post where he said Shakespeare was boring, from the beanbag in the office at 26, from the League of Legends game during the Sequoia pitch, exactly what he turned out to be? After his arrest, prosecutors released his private text messages. In one, sent to a journalist while he was still building the FTX brand, Sam wrote, quote, "The truth is, ethics is a dumb game we woke Westerners play. The press are useful idiots." In another, he described his public persona, the unkempt hair, the t-shirt, the philanthropy, as, quote, "the things I say in interviews to make people like me." He had not been a true believer. He had been speaking the language his audience wanted to hear. He had been performing a $30 billion performance, the largest in the history of finance, and the entire time he had known exactly what he was doing. His sentence will outlast his fame. But the $8 billion, the school teachers, the retirees, the ordinary people, they will outlast everything. Next week, a 28-year-old trader, a 233-year-old British bank, and a single morning that ended both of them, Nick Leeson and the fall of Barings.